Welcome to the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, your guide to understanding how to get out of the Wall Street rat race and start your own mailbox money lifestyle. Now, don't let these handsome Southern draws fool you. These financial minds are teaching our country to enhance savings, increase cash flow, and create passive income, all without the help of Wall Street. Are you ready to break through? Now here are your hosts, Russ Morgan and Joey Murray.
Welcome in. This is the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, episode 41. Can you believe, Russ, this is already episode 41?
41? The podcast is as old as I am, man.
I know that's not right. You look way older than the podcast.
Well, it's so funny. Actually, this episode, we're going to be bringing on somebody who's been listening to our podcast, who through listening has gone and done some of the research on infinite banking, has set up appointments with us, and is now in the process of getting their own program started so they can start using cash value as a resource to help them grow their real estate business. And he is 41. And my daughters met him the other day, and they were like, "Dad, did you know he's 41?" I was like, "Yeah, I knew it." And they're like, "He looks so much younger than you do." The best part about this, though, my wife, Megan, she looks at him. She said, "Well, you know what the difference between him and your dad is? Because he's single, has never been married." And they're like, "No." And she was like, she pointed at them and was like, "You two guys, you and your siblings are why he has the gray hair. That's why he looks so much older."
That is a game changer. Now, so a little bit more about Mark, though. He is also a pilot, right?
Yeah, I think that's so intriguing, right?
A lot of people that are pilots that have clients. So what more about that for people to know?
Well, I think, the fun part of having a new person onto our podcast that really doesn't have a whole lot of background. Most of our podcast is like, let's bring somebody on that's going to share kind of their business or different things they're doing so that we can learn from it. This, we took a kind of a different angle. We want to learn, but learn from somebody who is like you, maybe, that you're sitting in the chair right now or running down the road, you're listening to this podcast and you haven't taken the leap, where you're not using these insurance policies as a method to grow your wealth, to increase your cash flow, to enhance your passive income, any of these things. Well, Mark as a pilot by the way, pilots are notorious entrepreneurs. Like, they love getting involved in things. We have lots of pilots as clients. And I have met people that do all sort of things, maybe because they fly in and out of different ports. And so real estate is something they're really comfortable with. And they go into different cities. So it's really easy for them to get in and out of places, and they can go see different properties. So he's going to give us a perspective of that, but also really uniquely, he's from Hawaii. By the way, if you notice when in the podcast, he's going to not pronounce Hawaii the way that my Montgomeryism comes out, right? It's Hawaii.
It's a little different.
Yeah,
for sure.
They don't pronounce the W; they pronounce it with a V. So Hawaii is what they would say, which is pretty interesting.
See, I didn't even pick up on that.
Yeah, I'm a little more perceptive than you are on those kind of things. I'm usually, that's a gift I have.
Well, and speaking of perceptive, he's actually in town because of the 4th of July. And you and I were kind of talking before, how did it go? How was 4th of July for you? And you mentioned like you had some sort of really memorable 4th of July situation going on.
So here's the thing. My wife's parents bought a lake house the last year that she was in Auburn. And they actually had cashed out a 401k and bought a lake house. And we actually did a video and a podcast on this, right? The 401 lake house.
That's right.
It was a beautiful place. We used that lake for, 16, 17 years. Our kids grew up there. But there was one 4th of July. We'd always go down there. We would wait till dark, which is about 9 o'clock usually here in Alabama when it's really dark. And we would go out and shoot fireworks off their pier, off their deck. They had this double decker.
I remember that deck.
Yeah, so we would go up there, and everybody would kind of sit up on the hill, and we'd shoot the fireworks over the top of the water because we're trying to be safe, right? Didn't want to catch anything on fire. And so my brother-in-law and I was always kind of in charge of that. More him than me. He's the surgeon. He's going to take a lot more detail to make sure everything's right. And so we would go up there, shoot it off. Kids would have a great time. So this one time we did that, had got all the kids to bed. We hung out for a while, then we go to bed. About 12 o'clock at night, 12:30, I hear this bang, 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 bang. Bang, 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 bang. Hello, hello. And I'm kind of like waking up out of that, like been asleep maybe for 45 minutes where you're like just dead to the world, right?
Yeah.
And I hear this and I come running out of the room because our bedroom was on the main level. And of course, I'm, underpants, that's it. And there's this like young, maybe high teens, young 20s female at our back glass door yelling, "Your dock's on fire."
Oh, no.
And I'm like, what? And so like I'm trying to like, bring myself together, like get on some shorts, like try to wake up other people. I go get a fire extinguisher. We go down there, and thankfully, they say no churches are built after midnight. Well, I'm not certain what these three young adults were doing after midnight, but they had been riding down our little slough, and they were on their way back, and they noticed a fire on our dock. So basically, we had been shooting off fireworks off the top dock, and underneath that had this like tin roof that prevented water from like coming right down on top of the boats that were underneath it.
Right.
Well, I guess birds had built nest in that thing or something. It must have been all sort of like leaves and things. And the little embers from those fireworks had slowly filtered down there over time. And I guess had just like been simmering and finally just sparked. And that whole thing was starting to burn.
Oh,
and these
my
kids
goodness.
came by at the most providential time before. I mean, we had a pretty big hole just in that bottom of that top floor, but the whole thing would have gone down. Jet skis, pontoon boats, everything would have gone down had it not been for that. So that was one of the kind of fire safety moments. But I look back on that, it's kind of like, and for every year we would go back, of course, we replaced the wood, but you could see where it was. And it was kind of always that reminder, like, let's be a little extra careful. Let's take some water. Let's pour down some things.
No doubt. I mean, you could have had a whole second set of fireworks if that boat had caught it.
Oh my goodness.
Man.
No telling what would have happened. And just to think that those kids were coming by, I mean, because we were at the end of a slough. It wasn't like we were on Main Lake or anything. So it was only like maybe 6 or 7 houses past ours.
Wow.
It had to be those individuals. So whoever you are, if you're listening to the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast, I thank you because you saved the next year or so, because it had been a lot to replace all of that stuff and for it to come back. But going back into this podcast, we're going to be uncovering some of the challenges that Mark had been facing and what it was that he needed to overcome and how he learned about infinite banking. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about different life insurances. He had bought actually some other types of permanent life insurance, variable life, index universal life. And we're kind of breaking those down because sometimes people hear about this and then and maybe didn't hear about it from us, and they think, oh, well, yeah, I want to make as much money in these policies as I can. So they end up buying some sort of universal life policy, and there's some downfall. There's some pitfalls to that. And we won't get completely into that, but one of the things is coaching. I remember that being a big point in this podcast.
Yeah, and he's also going to share with us his successes, his failures, and I love that about him and what he was willing to share, and he wasn't scarce about sharing those things. So
yes, there's a book that he mentions that you absolutely need to go read if you have a scarce mindset, and it's really cool. He was telling us about that. That'd be awesome.
But hey, we need to go ahead and get into this interview.
We do.
Okay. All right, join us on the inside.
Welcome in the show, Mark. Glad to have you on.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome to be here.
Yeah, I mean, it's fun to have pilots' advice, right? Because a lot of times we get to sit behind the closed doors and not know who's on the other end of the mic, and today we actually get to see you. So you said a second ago, what stays behind those closed doors stays behind it, but is it like some sort of small peek, some sort of window of insight you can give us?
As to what we're doing up front?
Yeah.
We just want to get there as quickly as you.
Yeah.
We just want to be done with the day, get it over with.
Now, your journeys across the world, because you've lived in lots of different places, have led you into looking for different types of investments. And that was kind of an appeal as we've been talking over the last month or two, that I thought it would be wonderful for our audience who has very similar insights as yours, that they're looking for alternatives, they're looking for ways to grow wealth outside of Wall Street. You kind of have an interesting backstory, things that you've been doing. Share a little bit, if you would, of kind of where you've been and what you're trying to accomplish financially.
Yeah, I guess it all started in 2002 when I moved home, and my dad was able to, well, he'd already read some of the Rich Dad, Poor Dad stuff, and he thought it was a good, book. And as part of my package of being allowed to live at home for a year when I moved back to Hawaii was, here, read this book. And that just lit the fuse, because I've never really wanted to work that hard. And this is a way to accomplish that without having to, break my back and do it. So that really kind of lit me off there. And ever since then, I've always enjoyed and appreciated real estate. And coming from Hawaii, where up until recently, we haven't really been making more land, except with the volcano on Hawaii Island. Madam Pele is now recreating more land, building the island. But we do have a finite resource on the other islands, and the value of property has consistently gone up. And I just figured, hey, if you can get in at a certain point, lock it in, that's yours, and it's gonna go up. And so I started with my first condo in Honolulu, bought that in 2003, and was fortunate enough to be able to pay it off in a reasonable amount of time. And that just became the goose that would just lay golden eggs. That thing just made nothing but money for me.
Which, by the way, buying anything in Hawaii and paying it off is like a huge feat. I mean, I went there. I'm still trying to pay off the vacation, just part of the deal. I mean, that place is ridiculous. By the way, I forgot, you mentioned Robert Kiyosaki and obviously the connection being in Hawaii. How is he revered within the community there? Obviously, Joey and I love him. We talk about cash flow quadrant. We talk about Rich Dad, Poor Dad a lot. Is he pretty famous there in the Hawaiian Islands?
He's pretty popular. And I think what you got to there, which was a good point, is that buying and paying something off there really is a challenge. And I think that challenge is that fear is what keeps a lot of people from trying to do it. And I can attest to that, because living in Hawaii, the price to play is the way I like to look at it. 25% down as an investor for a piece of property. If you're talking about a $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 property, that's a lot of cash up front, and that skews your profit margin.
Yeah.
And so that really kind of held me back for several years of going, well, I just can't afford to do this. I can't afford to do this. And I only was familiar with Hawaii.
Yes.
And I wasn't at the point where I could look outside of the state of Hawaii and see opportunities that were presented on the mainland, or maybe other places or other avenues to generate that additional source of income.
Well, and you have to be familiar with those areas. I mean, when you talk about Hawaii, you knew the areas, you knew what the schools were like, you knew what was going to be an attractive property, but then you have to have that market knowledge in those other areas, and then be able to make those decisions.
Absolutely. So I was extremely comfortable with Hawaii. I knew what I could and couldn't get away with in terms of rent, for quality, for property, and I had no knowledge of what I could and couldn't do on the mainland.
So, do you feel like, as a pilot, with your background and experience of traveling, because personally, we have lots of clients that are pilots who listen to this podcast, and it seems to me that you guys are very entrepreneurial because you have downtime and in different ways, and you travel into different areas. I find that pilots are getting involved in all sorts of things. Is that just like a common conversation that you guys have in the cockpit from time to time, or traveling downtime with others, you're seeking out different investment opportunities? Or is that just my opinion from the few people that I've met?
I think it's there. There are a lot of people that do things. I think there's also, for me, I can speak to the culture of Hawaii, which is a very a bit more reserved in what you do and you don't talk about in public, which, is good and bad. You keep some of your stuff personal, but yet then now you're playing the game of I have a secret. And that piece of knowledge could be the thing that ignites somebody else to get them to where they really want to be.
Right.
But maybe they don't want to ask the question because they don't want to step out of bounds. They don't want to be impolite or create an awkward situation.
Yeah, that's a great book that you're referring to, The Secret, the concept of, are we going to be abundant with our thought process, or are we going to have this scarcity mindset that I can't share these ideas? And Joey and I have talked about abundance and scarcity numerous times on the podcast, not to mention teaching our kids on talking about money is not faux pas. Because I believe that is a huge setback for a lot of us, is that we were taught that as kids, that don't talk about money. I mean, it was easy for me because we didn't have money. It was nothing to talk about. It's a short conversation, right? I mean, you've heard enough dinner table conversations to know I grew up a redneck, and money was something that you admired, but you didn't know what it looked like. So I didn't know if it was green in reality or not.
Well, Mark, tell us a little bit more about, are there anything outside of real estate that you've done on this journey, trying to grow financial independence?
I did one, which, so.
We'll take the good, the bad, and the ugly on
so
the show, I promise.
Let's go ahead and get the bad out of the way because I think that it is refreshing to know that other people do make mistakes. Just as often as I do. Some people are fortunate enough to not make as many. I got interested in the idea of purchasing oil wells. So I got into a group that you could, deposit your money in, and you had a share of that oil rig and whatnot. And seemed like a great idea at the time. And then the price of gas, barrel of oil, went from $100+. Now we're down to, still hovering in the 60s. We're coming back up to 70. So that was an investment that did not pan out for me, that did not give me the return that we had anticipated getting. So that's kind of just been a write-off.
Do you still own interest in that?
I do own the interest, but it's nil.
Yeah.
And when I spoke to the individuals that were a part of that, and they said, well, you can pretty much expect that you're never going to get that back. So thankfully it was a small investment, but every investment counts, and it's a learning experience of, do your research, but you really have to, in my personal opinion, you can't put the money out there that you don't have some ability to say, okay, I can afford to lose this. I can afford to take this because I've done the research and I believe that the risk is acceptable.
Right. That's what we talk about. There's a major difference between savings and investing. Mm-hmm. And investing has to fall into that bucket you just mentioned. I'm okay to lose this, but I do hope it goes up.
Oh, absolutely.
I do hope it comes back to me with friends.
Well, at the end of the day, you have to, you're either trusting the people that you're investing in, or you're trusting in your knowledge of whatever you're investing in. And we've all made investments into things that we hoped would go up, but really had little influence into whether or not they could. And I mean, oil and gas is a very popular idea. That's something that's very intriguing. I mean, you see the people out there, you're like, oh yeah, I could see my name on a football stadium one day, right? That could be me. You watch the biographies of the different people out there, the Jerry Joneses of the world, and how they made their fortunes. That's easily attractive. Outside of oil and gas, real estate, you've also got involved in life insurance. That was one of the things where kind of our discussion started, is that you had put money into variable life insurance, which is something I'm very familiar with. I used to own myself. And we talk about on this show the differences between whole life insurance and these others. Give me some experience in that, how you got involved into that, and what maybe you thought it was going to do, and is it playing out the way you thought?
So the very first one I got was a life insurance return policy, and it was marketed and pitched to me in the form of, I was working overseas, so I did not have access to a traditional 401k. And so at the time, my knowledge was that, well, I need to put something away, otherwise I'll just spend it. So this was developed as a way to put money in, grow tax-free. And if the market keeps going up, you keep making more. But the part of the market coming crashing down again and me losing what was in there was kind of glossed over. But ultimately, it was my responsibility to do the homework and to recognize that on my own. I can't expect someone else to tell me everything that might go bad with a product. So that one really was pitched more as a downrange retirement vehicle. Moved home in 2011, got excited about some other things, and the idea of using an insurance policy as a vehicle to create your own banking system was pitched. And started doing some homework on that. And the group that I went with for that was using a equity indexed universal life policy.
Right.
So they were pegging it to an index, saying that, well, you're going to get a minimum amount of growth, but you may get this as a maximum amount, but you'll never go above this, and supposedly you will never go below.
And the concept was that you can use this, you can go invest in real estate, you can invest in oil and gas or whatever sort of things float your boat, and you have the benefit of this index moving up and down. How many times have you taken loans against that policy to do any of those things?
A whopping 0.
That's a challenge whenever you're investing in real estate.
Yeah.
to not use it, right?
And so what was hindering me was my thought process of how money should and shouldn't be used. I was stuck in the traditional rut of, okay, I've got to save up 25%. And then I've got to go find a property, get the property, put the 25% down, do the mortgage, go through all these steps along the way. And I knew that the policies were there. I knew that they had cash value. I knew that I could tap into it. But something just wasn't clicking in my head of, wait a minute, I can actually use this and virtually, in banking terms, instantaneously get access to that money with no credit check, no bank statements, no tax returns, none of that paperwork process, because it's already guaranteed due to my policy.
Well, and by the way, Mark, what you're saying is something Joey and I hear on a weekly basis. Hey, I bought this contract. They may even bought a whole life policy. I bought it on the premise somebody told me that I could use it. I could do real estate with it. I could invest in my business with it. I could send my kids to college with it. And they've never done any of those things with it. Unlike you, a lot of those policies, unfortunately, were not purchased where they actually were growing much cash. A lot of it was just feeding the death benefit. Yours at least had set up to where your cash was growing. But what we find is that without coaching along the way, there just isn't a whole lot of experience or education that goes along with that helps you move that. So for everybody who's listening right now, how did you get interested in becoming your own banker from our part? Like where did that trigger happen? Like how did you see the light to what we're talking about and really push you toward finding out more on it?
So I'll just make a disclaimer for everyone that's listening. I'm not being paid or compensated in any way. And I know this is going to put a smile on both of your faces, but it really was your podcast. I just started devouring that like there was no tomorrow. I started listening to it, and that really kind of re-triggered that thing inside me. I had gone through a bad year last year in terms of some properties that did not perform. The management companies basically took all the money, let the properties go derelict. So I ate last year's profit on 2 properties and just had to give that back to Uncle Sam and write that off as a loss. But in listening to those podcasts and hearing the concepts, the philosophies, and just having it reinforced, really kind of hit a tone with me. And then I got the Infinite Banking book from Nelson Nash, and I thought it would be a harder read. I thought it would be a bigger book. I thought it would be textbook-ish, but it's really very user-friendly.
What's one thing in that book that you read was maybe a light bulb moment?
It was there's the one where he talks about the two people who rent a car. Buy a car.
Yeah, the two sisters. Yeah.
And the one who uses the policy and the one who pays cash, and how much farther ahead the policy sister is versus the cash sister. They both achieved the same result in terms of cars and satisfying that need. But the ability to have access to all that cash later on, and that's really something that I wish I would have recognized earlier, and we just recognized the other day when we were talking in the car, is that I was afraid of paying the interest for the loan I would take for my life insurance policy.
Yeah.
Because I thought, well, we'll just use a number. There's 5% that's just evaporating into thin air.
Right.
And it wasn't until a couple days ago and then yesterday you confirmed it that, well, that if I have $100,000 in a policy, just make it an easy number, 5%, that's $5,000 in a year. I have first right of refusal to my money. So it will be lent to me. I will pay that 5%. And that 5% is actually what goes back in to grow the policy minus fees and expenses. So I'm actually paying myself to grow my own money.
Yes. The difference in those two examples, which was exactly what clicked for me, by the way, 2009, I'm sitting in this conference and this guy said, let me show you guys how to buy cars. And he didn't go through that example in the book, but he used a similar scenario. And it was like, oh, so the difference is I can earn interest in a savings account, CD, whatever it is. I can earn interest in an insurance policy. But the profits, as you were just talking about in real estate and other things, the profits go to the banks when I borrow money from them, or I give up those profits by paying cash, versus when I'm in an insurance company and I'm an owner. Like we are always telling our clients, we buy mutual insurance companies, not stock companies. So the policyholders are the only owners. Then that interest goes to the insurance company, which we're owner of. So we're sharing in that value. We're sharing in those profits.
In the profits, yeah. The other thing I want to point out that you mentioned is you had a shift from, okay, I'm going to save over here for this long-term benefit, whatever it is. And gratefully, I mean, you were doing it through an insurance contract, not some of the things that we kind of poo-poo on in the show, like the stock-based 401ks and other things. But you are doing almost double duty because you're still trying to accomplish buying these rental homes by saving up over in this bucket when you have cash over in the long-term, quote-unquote, long-term bucket, in this insurance contract. When you bring those two things together, now you're saving for the long term and you've got access to the cash to buy into the rental properties or whatever else is that you want to use that cash for. And so I find that it's a hard thing to break out of, the mindset that I have to have this long-term bucket and the short-term bucket. You can really bring those two together and not give up the long-term gains.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned to me that your goal is to get to 70 or 80 rental properties.
Mm-hmm.
What do you see as your biggest challenge keeping you from getting there?
Well, two challenges. One is keeping myself accountable, which I think is the number one challenge for most of us, is keeping yourself on track, kind of giving yourself a timeline. Okay, when do I want to accomplish things? When do I want to accomplish them no later than? And then the other part of that is if I can do that, stay on track with that, then the only other challenge really is finding those opportunities. And I thought one of your podcasts was great, which is that opportunities will seek out cash. And I was speaking with a provider that I do some rentals with, and we were talking about some of the properties they had coming up available. And I asked the question because, let's face it, we're all new at some point, and you might as well ask the, quote, dumb question just to get it out of the way. And my question was, look, you've done this more than I have. This person has, hundreds of properties. I said, I've never bought a property cash. And then on the back end, mortgaged it out and taken my money back out. I said, have you done that? And what are your pros, cons, and whatnot with that. And so we talked about it, but you could hear his voice change a little bit and his excitement. And he goes, well, if you're going to be paying cash, I've got this other property. And he shows me the pro forma for that. And this thing is just a beast, but it doesn't show quite as well because you got to basically pay cash.
You can't finance it as is.
No.
Yeah.
And that opportunity didn't exist to you because he didn't think you had the cash because you hadn't bought deals with cash. It's so true. I mean, we've talked about that on this podcast. In real estate, really, it's having opportunity to deals and having opportunity to cash. That's really what makes somebody successful, right? Well, you're been knee deep into whole life insurance and how do we use it as a tool, right? So this is something you've been researching for several months now. In your experience, because you haven't done it yet, but you're still on the front end of this. What is your take on how what you're getting ready to potentially move into, how is that going to help you accomplish that goal of getting 70 to 80 properties?
Velocity of money. Once everything that I've read, and I haven't quite gotten to the true velocity portion of it, but I have a friend who, when I, 3 years ago, when I started picking up Memphis properties, she was already getting into portfolios. So she was doing double-digit properties. She had ran out of her 10 initial properties that you could use finance regularly. She had to go to portfolios. And you could see the velocity of money starting to happen with her, where in the beginning, you've got one rental. All right, if that rental goes empty, you have 100% vacancy.
Yeah.
Not good odds.
No.
But you get two, one goes empty, all right? So the other property can kind of help float the first one until you get back on your feet. You get to three, all right, that first one going empty really doesn't seem like that big of a problem because the other two are now covering. And the more you get, losing one rental going vacant doesn't seem like that, okay, fine, whatever, I'm going to make a little bit less, but I'm still making. And so that money, the more properties or the more vehicles you have that are bringing in that passive income, which we talked about this, there's nothing truly passive about passive income. You do have to do your homework and stay on top of the vehicle that is bringing that revenue in for you. Stay on it so that you can stay focused and keep them accountable. But the more income you have coming in, it just starts feeding itself, and you've got to find things to do with that. And that extra income, well, what can I do with this? I can start growing it into something else, and boom, I'm into another one, and now it just keeps growing and growing.
Well, that's a great point that you're making. Velocity is the way that banks make money, right? They don't lend dollars out and then just store them as those dollars come back, right? It's constantly figuring out ways to do it. And as you said, if your goal is real estate, then the more properties you have is going to reduce your risk in the fact that you're going to have less out there, as long as all the deals you're getting into are solid, right?
Profitable.
You can't just go buy lots of deals and say, just because I have lots of deals, I have lots of properties. But opportunities do find cash. Do you see in your scope right now, do you find that real estate is a little overcooked, or are you still finding ways to buy property?
Well, I'm just getting back into buying property. Like I said, took a little hiatus there for a bit, had to regroup. I had to recalibrate my risk tolerance. And I think that's a big one for everyone is, what is your risk tolerance? And I think the way that you can move past that, at least the way that I challenge myself to move past it, is through education. If you can educate yourself, now the risk doesn't seem that bad. It's manageable, it's understandable. I'm sure some people would think that flying is risky. Well, it's something that's a little bit unknown, but I do it all the time. I'm very comfortable with it. I'm knowledgeable about it. And so flying doesn't seem like a risk to me. For me, the reward of getting there in a couple hours is a lot better than having to drive or row a boat from Hawaii to the West Coast. Might take a little bit longer. So that risk reward there is there for me. And that's where I see rental properties for me personally is I feel comfortable with rental properties. I have a decent understanding of how the risk and the reward can go, the things that can break, the things that can, challenge you in that respect. And I'm okay with that as long as I can make the numbers fit on my spreadsheet and everything looks the way that I am agreed to taking it.
So let's, as we start kind of landing the plane, if you will.
Oh, that's perfect.
There's people that are listening to this podcast right now who are kind of sitting on the fence of this whole becoming your own banker. They've been listening for a while and maybe even reading some of the books. What are some of the things that you would encourage them to do to help them kind of make a decision one way or another? What, just from your perspective, because you're still fresh to it. So this is, I think, the best perspective we could give somebody.
Well, if for anything that's new, I would probably recommend start small.
Yeah.
Don't, if you've got $50,000, $100,000, however much you have in there, I probably wouldn't take it right up to the limit and go and throw it out there on the table and, hope that the roulette wheel hits black for me and I get to double my money. Take your baby steps, take measured and acceptable risk, things that you can understand and justify. If you start small, then you can build up that comfort level. And then now, as time goes on, now you're ready to move into the bigger programs, the bigger projects, the bigger expenditures for potentially bigger reward.
In relationship to learning about infinite banking, what would be some things you would tell them to do?
Read the book.
Becoming your own banker?
Becoming your own banker.
Okay.
Yeah, we've actually put that in the show notes a number of times. We'll put it in for this episode as well. A link for you can go and buy that on Amazon, and so be sure to check that out.
Well, and I think too, he mentioned earlier the video, or he mentioned the example in the book on the CD sister versus the insurance sister. And you and I did a video on that. We need to put that in the show notes so that we can have that. By the way, I did one a long time ago, and it was not pretty.
I saw it.
But we have a new updated one. So just as we wrap this up, just from your perspective, though, as you do you feel invigorated that this concept and process is going to help you get toward that 70 to 80 rental property mark?
Absolutely. It's that high, that new thing. It's like starting something new, and like the book says, the infinite banking, the possibilities are infinite of how you want to use this money, how you choose to use this money, and how you figure out how to use this money. And I would encourage everyone, again, to avoid playing the game of I have a secret. If you've found a great way to do something and you bump into people who are engaged and willing and open to talk about that topic, because money is still a bit of a challenge for some people to get into talking about, but not that you're telling them how to use their money, but sharing what you've done. And that's where I'm at, is I need to get to the point where I am comfortable and confident in what I've done, that then I can truly share it and say, this is what has worked for me.
Yeah.
And now it's up to you to decide what you want to do.
Well, Mark, thank you for coming on and not keeping this a secret, but being willing to share, be open. This is your first podcast, right?
This is my very first, my debut performance.
There you go. All right. Well, as we sign off, we want to have the captain's best PA as a sign off. Give us your best PA.
Well, that's kind of pressure right there.
Yeah, let's hear it.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, once again, from the flight deck, I want to thank you for choosing to fly with us today. Hope you've enjoyed the ride. We look forward to seeing you again on a future flight.
There you have it.
Fly high.
This has been the Wealth Without Wall Street podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to the show to break free of the Wall Street mindset and begin building wealth on your own terms in places you understand, so that your wealth will never run dry. See you next episode.